न वहां कोई हमारी सीमा में घुस आया है, न ही कोई घुसा हुआ है, न ही हमारी कोई पोस्ट किसी दूसरे के कब्जे में है। लद्दाख में हमारे 20 जाबाज शहीद हुए, लेकिन जिन्होंने भारत माता की तरफ आंख उठाकर देखा था, उन्हें वो सबक सिखा कर गए हैं। उनका ये शौर्य, ये बलिदान हमेशा हर भारतीय के मन में अमिट रहेगा। आज हमारे पास ये कैपेबिलिटी है कि कोई भी हमारी 1 इंच जमीन की तरफ आंख उठाकर भी नहीं देख सकता। आज भारत की सेनाएं हर सेक्टर में एक साथ मूव करने में पूरी तरह सक्षम है। ऐसे में हमने जहां एक तरफ सेना को अपने स्तर पर उचित कदम उठाने की छूट दी है, वहीं दूसरी तरफ डिप्लोमेटिक माध्यमों से भी चीन को अपनी बात दो टूक स्पष्ट कर दी है। भारत पीस और फ्रेंडशिप चाहता है, लेकिन अपनी सॉवरेनिटी की रक्षा हमारे लिए सर्वोपरि है।
That was the Prime Minister trying to clear the air about what happened on 15th night. He said that India has the capability to respond. All our soldiers who died, their sacrifices will not go in vain. They gave a befitting response to the Chinese soldiers as well. And he said that no one has transgressed into Indian territory. But of course, there are certain questions. The Minister for External Affairs, in his phone conversation with Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi on the 15th, had said that the Chinese tried to erect certain structures on the Indian side, and when the Indian side protested, there was a dispute and there was violence from the Chinese side as well. Now, the latest that we can tell you as well, the Chinese Foreign Ministry has come out with a statement saying they reiterate their claims over the Galwan region. They also have come out with their version of the sequence of events, saying that India has been violating the status quo in Galwan at the LAC since April. They've been building roads, bridges, and other structures. China is also blaming India for what happened on the 6th of May. That was when the first clash between Indian and Chinese troops took place in Pangong Tso, and that's when the 45-day-long standoff began. Where do things stand? Joining us right now, Ambassador K.C. Singh, Praveen Swami, Strategic Affairs Expert, Group Consulting Editor, Network 18. We've got Brahma Chalane, another Strategic Affairs Expert with us, Anand Krishnan of The Hindu with us as well. Ambassador K.C. Singh, if I could ask you first, do you think the Prime Minister's statement clears the air on a number of key issues that we had no answers to? Why were our soldiers taken hostage? What were the terms of the negotiation? How much have the Chinese transgressed into our territory? Do you think the Prime Minister's speech somehow cleared the air as well?
Look, it's not so much what Prime Minister says. What Prime Minister says is semantically correct. There's nothing wrong about it. And none of her posts has been overtaken by any force. And he says nobody's intruded into Indian land. Now, the question is, we are not talking of just Indian land. We are talking of the line of actual control about which there are competing versions, the Chinese version and the Indian version. You take simply Pangong Tso. Now, in that, the Indian version has always been, and that's what all the senior retired generals, retired chief of army staff, they are saying, ran through Finger 8. Now, there's a road built by the Chinese from Finger 8 to Finger 4. All satellite pictures are now showing the Chinese are well entrenched at Finger 4. Now, what does that mean? Now, this is the Chinese claim line. They have claimed their line of actual control and they have reached it. Now, therefore, for us to say nobody is intruded, you can interpret it by saying, yes, they're not come beyond 4, but then they're not allowing us to go to 8. So therefore, the question which arises, the troublesome, the two interpretations you can put on Prime Minister's statement. One is he indirectly conceding the Chinese interpretation of the LAC? And the second is this really public, a moderate position in the public which has been taken so that Chinese don't lose face, and therefore the diplomatic negotiations which are going on, or the generals when they meet, then that this does not impinge on that. And therefore there is a public adoption of a moderate stance, which can be interpreted two ways, leaving a scope for the Chinese to retreat. By the same time, the Chinese subsequently have just reiterated their position. So therefore, it leaves some vagueness about which way to take it.
That's right. And we must also tell our viewers that when it comes to the line of actual control, both countries have different perceptions of where the boundary is located. And that's where all the dispute arises. Praveen Swami also with us. Praveen, how do you see the Chinese Foreign Ministry statement once again reiterating the claim over the Galwan region? In fact, they've come out with the entire sequence of events saying that whatever has happened since April, India is to blame and we've been violating the status quo.
I think, as Ambassador Singh pointed out, this boils down to somewhat complicated debate about what you think, where you think the line of control actually is. If you look at Chinese maps published in 1960 and again in 1962, they claim the entire Galwan River lies on their side of the LAC. These are published maps. And what they're saying is not entirely untrue. Our own official history of the 1962 war concedes that all our military positions in the Galwan River or Galwan Nala were evicted in 1962. The fact also is that Indian troops have been patrolling into many areas from which Indian troops were evicted in the war of 1962 for many years now. We claim that the LAC runs up to the points where those troops at various times have patrolled. There is, of course, no published Indian official map that tells us what those lines are, but we know that since the 1980s, when the Chinese began building up border infrastructure, various parts have been lost. It seems to me the Prime Minister's phrasing is intended to bring home to many Indians that what we've been taught in the 10th standard about where our borders lie is possibly not the truth, and preparing public opinion for what will necessarily be some painful acknowledgement of reality that will have to go ahead of any border negotiation. I suspect there's been some conversations between the foreign ministries in both countries on how that border negotiation might be kickstarted, and we'll have to wait and see where it heads. But like Ambassador Singh said, on point of fact, I don't think the Prime Minister said anything wrong.
Right. Lieutenant General Rameshwar Roy, if I can get you in, I think Ambassador K.C. Singh and Praveen are making very important points that, yes, the Chinese have intruded areas which we perceive to be our own territory. It's going to be a very difficult negotiation. It's going to be very difficult to get the Chinese back, to ask them to move their troops back, their heavy vehicles, their construction activity. Do you think we're now probably inching towards accepting the new facts on the ground? Do you fear that, General Roy?
Okay, let me give a soldier's perspective. Since, all along this has been a perception battle, So what Ambassador K.C. Singh has said, or what Praveen Swami has said, they both are right. At the same time, the Prime Minister is also right as far as the technicalities of the wordings or the semantics are concerned. But as a soldier, I would like to submit this, that the perception of the line of actual control, as far as the Chinese are concerned, they have tried to put it as much far forward towards the west on our side, whereas we, when we do out the patrolling activities on the ground, we try to take it as much towards the eastern side, their side. Now, the problem here is that the claim that they have made and the announcement that the Prime Minister has made yesterday, the implication is that on the ground, our activities now cannot be extended into Galwan Valley because earlier we were patrolling into that. And at the same time, we cannot go beyond Finger 4 because earlier we were going up to Finger 8. Therefore, the issue here is, the bigger issue is that once we give in to their perception battle of their perceived line of actual control, it is not going to stop here itself. If they carry out a change of status of the LAC as of now from what Prime Minister has spoken yesterday, the implications are that the line of actual control will never be a static line. It will keep shifting, and in every assertion of theirs, they will, by the hook or by crook, they have a creeping forward strategy, and they will keep forwarding this line further and further to the west. Where do we go? Are we in the process of getting entire Ladakh in this manner over the next 10, 20 years? That is what a soldier starts feeling the moment this perception.
Lieutenant Roy, are the Chinese forces in a position right now to dominate us, be it in Pangong Tso or be it in Galwan? Is the DBO road and the bridge that we built over the Galwan River, do you think that is threatened right now?
Absolutely, absolutely. Right now, where they have come up to, and they have come up with preparation, they are not going to go back. There has been 22 rounds of talks in as many years. Nothing has come out of it. Now also talks will take us nowhere. These Chinese PLA people at Finger 4 and in Galwan Valley are here to stay, and they will make sure that we are not able to carry out any activity on the DBO road, nor are we able to go beyond Finger 4, and that is the ground implication, which is very, very dangerous for all times to come for future generations.
Right. Anant, thank you so much for joining us as well. The Chinese have come out with their own sequence of events, but I found the last paragraph rather interesting, where they don't say that we need to work together to sort things out on the ground or cool things down. They said, work with us. They also said that India should faithfully abide by the consensus reached earlier when it came to disengagement. What do you see? How do you see these words, the statement from the Chinese side?
Well, Parikshit, I have no doubt that the Chinese media and Chinese analysts will look at the Prime Minister's words yesterday as a win. I don't have any doubt about that. And I think there's two reasons for that. I think the points about the LAC, I think at the end of the day, the fact is that I don't think what the Prime Minister said about no Chinese presence on Indian territory doesn't accord with the facts. At the end of the day, India's LAC is where it is. And both India and China mutually agreed that there are different perceptions of the LAC in 1993 and 1996. And I think we know, I think the facts tell us that at least in two places, maybe more, there is a Chinese presence on India's side of the LAC. It's clear as day that that is the case in Pangong Tso, so I don't think it accords with the facts. And the second issue with what he said is that it will undermine the ongoing disengagement process as India negotiates with China, because if India is asking China to dilute or withdraw its presence, for example, at Pangong Lake, the Chinese can say, well, when your Prime Minister said that we aren't present in your territory. So I don't think it was well thought out what he said. And I think that if you look at the Chinese Foreign Ministry statement as well on Galwan Valley, I think what Praveen Swami said is correct in terms of where their claims have been. But there have been Chinese maps as well, more recent Chinese maps that show most of the Galwan River within China, but not the western extremity where it meets the Shiok River. And I think that's the area now that where China is saying the LAC runs. And as far as I understand it, this is west of where India assumed the LAC to be, and Indian troops have been patrolling east of the confluence of the rivers. And it seems to be China's request made on June 6th, as the Foreign Ministry told us yesterday, is that India should not cross the confluence of the rivers. So essentially that boils down to a changing of the status quo in this area and also in the Pangong Lake area as well. And I think that there is a concern that perhaps isn't reflected adequately in what the Prime Minister said yesterday.
Right. Let me go back to Praveen. Praveen, do you feel that we lost ground when our soldiers were captured? That gave China a dominant position in the bargaining, in those talks that took place at the level of major generals, and also between Foreign Minister Jaishankar and Foreign Minister Wang Yi.
I don't believe that a military skirmish, no matter how tragic and awful its outcomes would have been for India, that a single military skirmish would have shaped India's negotiation strategy. That's not the way nation states work. Where I think there is a fundamental disjunct is you have people turning around and saying that, look, China is creeping westwards, and that this is not acceptable and we need to do something about it, which is all very well and fine. But where people making these claims are not very clear is what exactly they want done about it. Do they want a response through military means, which I think any sober person looking at a military 20 years ahead of India's on its modernization trajectory, and one whose capital expenditure is orders of magnitude higher than ours, I don't think that's a course of action any responsible person advocates. Do they want some sort of protracted sort of the kind of hiffing and hoffing and maximalist public posturing that's gone on for years? That's not yielded results. So what exactly the options are that are being advocated are not particularly clear. And under the circumstances, if the Prime Minister is saying, look, this is where our posts are, let's have some kind of de facto standstill on those posts and then negotiate a way forward for the gray zone, if you like, or the buffer that exists between these two. It does not seem to me to be an unreasonable posture.
Right, that's an important point, Praveen. On that note, we'll have to take a short break. Lots more on this discussion. We request all our guests to stay with us. Welcome back. We're discussing India-China tensions at the LAC. The Chinese Foreign Ministry reiterating its claims over the Galwan region. The Prime Minister saying no one has transgressed into our territory, and our soldiers who died valiantly fought the Chinese troops as well. Ambassador Casey Singh, the Chinese, through their repeated statements and even the last statement they put out, they have made it clear what, according to them, the LAC should be. They're claiming Galwan as their own. How do we move forward from here? What are our options? How can India diplomatically negotiate its way?
Look, very simply, this is a typically Chinese method. You alter the status quo, you be the aggressor. They've done the same thing in South China Sea. And once you've got there, then you redefine reality. Now, if Prime Minister's statement is only public accommodation of China, whereas China has agreed to step back, then it's fine. But if we think we will negotiate on the basis of China assuming that India has thrown in the towel, then we've already lost the fight. Now you go back to the three agreements, 93, 96, then of course 2013 agreement came later. The 93, 96 agreements on maintaining peace and stability around the LAC came when the Chinese economy was in trouble. After the 89 Tiananmen Square massacre and the Western sanctions against China, their economy fell from double-digit growth in 1989 to low single-digit in 91, 92. They recovered somewhat, and then came the financial crisis in 98. So the Chinese are amenable to pressure and being reasonable when they find that they have economic or other issues. At the moment, they realize we are distracted by the pandemic. They realize that India is looking elsewhere. And nobody expected the Chinese to move forward and do this. So they have come and altered the status quo in an area where they were clearly announcing since August that our national interests have been impacted by Article 37 abrogation and the division of Jammu and Kashmir into two union territories and the reissuing of maps. Therefore, we should have been alert. We should have known that this is an area where Chinese are likely to come and intrude. This is where they may come and adopt the kind of technique they've adopted elsewhere. And this is not simply about territory. This is to show India down at a time that we were joining hands in the Quad. We are sending signals that we oppose them in the Indo-Pacific. So it's a larger battle. If Prime Minister by and large is seen as
Praveen?
Throwing in the towel, then we are in trouble.
Praveen, Mike Pompeo also spoke last evening, and he said that what is happening in South China Sea, what is happening in Hong Kong, what is happening at the Indian border follows a certain pattern. China is aggressively pushing its claims all around the world. A Chinese diplomat also said that today the world is preoccupied with COVID-19, and China is taking advantage of the situation and advantage of India's problems with COVID-19 as well. Do you think global pressure would work in India's favor? Do you think if India reaches out to the United States, which we must be via back channels, do you think that pressure will work on the Chinese? Can that help at the border at all, or you don't think so?
Unfortunately, we're at a juncture in history where the United States, by the way, I think what Mr. Pompeo is saying is completely correct. But the United States has rarely been this reluctant to walk the talk. It's done very little in the South China Seas. Its own NATO allies are deeply alarmed about the United States' posture on the threats they face from Russia. And I think for anyone in India to expect that America is going to come and pull our chestnuts out of the fire would be fantasizing, not reality. I keep hearing on social media and elsewhere that, look, this is okay. We can be defiant, Churchillian. We can give the Chinese a bloody nose. That's probably true, but we'll end up with a few broken bones ourselves in the process of that bloody nose. The Chinese bided their time, built up their national power, and are today in a position to behave like bullies. It would be profoundly unwise for us to push forward with aggression when it would invite aggression that we would suffer the consequences of. I write on warfare for a living, and I know that soldiers must die in wars. All I will say is that for a single Indian soldier to be sacrificed without a clear strategic end would be rank irresponsibility. And if anyone thinks that by baring our teeth in these mountains, we will somehow terrorize or frighten China into conceding our aims, they're probably profoundly misguided on this. I think this is a time for restraint, to have a realistic appraisal of our strengths and weaknesses, and to bide our time until we are in a position to alter that real balance of power.
Right, bide our time and strengthen your position in the meanwhile. Lieutenant General Roy, do you think now that China has come out with its version, saying that India started building bridges, roads, and other infrastructure in Galwan in April, they entered Chinese territory on the 6th of May, they were the aggressors here, they were the ones responsible for provoking Chinese soldiers. Do you think India must now come up with its own sequence of events, explain what we've been doing or at the LSC since April, what happened on the 6th of May, what happened on the 9th of May, and what exactly led to the death of 20 soldiers?
Look, my appreciation of the situation here is that going by the strategic implications that this area, PLA's ingress into this area has, as far as we are concerned, I was listening to Mr. Praveen Sahni, and I know he is quite an expert on the Chinese issues, but at the same time, while we may not like to escalate the situation by going in for any offensive, and we probably may not really have the wherewithal to do that right now, but definitely we are in a position to hold them at this juncture up to whichever point they have come and continue with our face-off, and we should not allow any further ingress by the PLA into these areas beyond the point up to which they have already come. And definitely the India should not lose a perception battle of the LAC right now, because if it does, it has got very long-term serious implications, and it will weaken our position strategically on the ground as well as internationally also. Therefore, my strong recommendation would be that we should continue with our face-off right now in the positions up to which they have come and hold them back, and that capability definitely we have. Chinese will find it absolutely impossible to go past wherever we got our defensive positions, and we must hold it, and we should not allow them to win their perception battle, because if they win it now, we are going to lose it time and again to this perception battle, because they will keep on coming out with new and new perceptions like they have done in last nearly over 6 decades, and we will continue to keep losing to them time and again, and therefore now is the time to hold fast and not to lose our perception battle to them. We can definitely hold them here in the face-off.
Okay, and Anand, coming to you, just going back to the Chinese Foreign Ministry statement, and you must tell our viewers that this statement came before the Prime Minister's speech. I think there was a press conference by the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson yesterday afternoon, but at night, the Chinese embassy and the Chinese government uplinked this particular statement as well. Anand, in this statement, they say that India was responsible for provoking Chinese soldiers on their side of the LAC on 15th night. Indian soldiers caused violence and this massive physical clash that took place. also causing casualties. They don't mention casualties on the Indian side or the Chinese side, but do you think the Chinese are now conceding that there were casualties and there could be casualties on their side as well? They've kept that ambiguous in the statement.
I think Parikshit, reading between the lines, I think they haven't hid the fact that they did suffer casualties. That's come out from the PLA statement, which was similar to this, leaving unclear how many there were. It's also come out from things said by Chinese state media journalists on Twitter and Weibo, where they have said there are Chinese casualties, but they're very unlikely to say how many casualties there were for many reasons. That's in keeping with past precedents, where China has waited for, in some cases, decades before putting out official figures of casualties from wars. I think it took them 32 years to kind of officially say that what their casualties were in 1962. So I think reading between the lines, I think it is clear there were casualties on both sides, but I wouldn't be expecting them to come out and say it. It would be a big break from the past. And I think on the Chinese Foreign Ministry's statement, it kind of reiterates what they said last week as well. I think the fact is both sides have very, very different versions of events of what happened on June 15th. And I think that we can't expect otherwise. I think the Chinese are maintaining that India provoked whatever happened during the disengagement process on June 15th. The MEA has rebutted that and said it was the other way around. And I think that rather than go back on what exactly happened then, I think both sides are now focused on moving forward and looking at how they can take this disengagement process and continue with it without a recurrence of what happened last Monday.
Right. I think some very strong points made by all our panelists that we need to bide our time. We need to strengthen ourselves in the meanwhile and use probably all options in the diplomatic toolkit as well. Ambassador K.C. Singh, Praveen Swami, Lieutenant General Roy, and Anand, thank you very much for joining us.